It's July 2017. Dead by Daylight is a relatively small and uprising game. Averaging around 20,000 players a day, it steadily built a dedicated community around its unique, asymmetrical horror concept, something that, at the time, had little direct competition, with only a few titles such as Friday the 13th the game and Depp attempting anything similar. But in order for Dead by Daylight to continue growing, it needed to deliver new content that would keep the player base engaged. So on July 27, 2017, the game released a new chapter titled Lullaby for the Dark, introducing a new killer, a new map, but most importantly, a new survivor. That survivor was David King. And as every Dead by Daylight player knows, each character comes with 3 unique perks for everyone to use. And among David's arsenal was a perk called Dead Hard. And unbeknownst to both the player base and the developers at the time, one of the most broken and impactful perks in the entire history of Dead by Daylight had just been released.
At one point you will expect this perk on everyone, and this perk is absolutely nutty.
Probably first or second best exhaustion perk in the entire game.
This perk completely changes how chases pan out, forcing the killer to wait for you to dead hard. It lets you avoid all forms of attack, even attacks that would typically insta-down.
So on the count of 3, start chasing, and we're gonna see how many loops we can actually make. All right, that's gonna be 1. That's gonna be 2. Should I dead hard? I think yes. That's gonna be. Wait, is that 3? Or is that? I lost count.
As said, patch 1.6.0 added Dead Hard, an exhaustion perk activated while being injured that lets you perform a dash for just half a second upon pressing your activation key. After that, it goes on a 40-second cooldown in which you cannot recover while sprinting. A perk that at first glance seemed so simple and even a bit underwhelming. Just a short dash meant to create space or dodge a hit with a hefty wait time. Many players overlooked it at first and didn't even bother giving it a chance, considering the current meta at the time was pretty strong and few people were willing to actually step outside of the comfort zone. But as always, a few curious people decided to experiment, and that's when things started to shift for this perk. The more people used Dead Hard, the more they realized that this perk wasn't just a mobility tool. It was something far more powerful. While some players struggled with the timing and others just wrote it off entirely, those who stuck with it discovered something game-changing. The dash didn't only help you escape, it could completely deny a killer's hit. And with the right timing, one press of a button could turn a guaranteed down into a second chance, a prolonged chase, or even a full-on escape from the trial. The community started to catch on, slowly at first, then all at once. Dead Hard wasn't just viable, it was essential. In September of 2017, the Survivor meta was already starting to shift. Self-care and borrowed time, 2 of the most picked perks in the game at the time, had just been nerfed, and almost immediately, players began searching for new ways to stay alive, extend chases, and bring something fresh to their loadouts. And that's when more and more survivors started giving Dead Hard a second look. At first, it still wasn't widely understood. The timing was tricky, the animation could be awkward, and a mistimed press meant getting downed anyway. But those who put in the time quickly understood the true power of this perk. It let survivors squeeze out just enough distance to reach a window, a pallet, or even bait out a killer's swing entirely. And unlike perks such as Springburst or Balanced Landing, Dead Hard didn't rely on the map layout or how you started the chase. It was fully in the hands of survivors. What used to be a niche perk quickly turned into a core part of most survivor builds. Players who mastered the timing weren't just lasting longer, they were changing the outcome of the entire match. Killers had to second guess most of their hits, and chases became unpredictable. The impact was real, and the numbers reflected it. Dead Hard was picking up momentum and fast. By late 2017, it had cemented itself as one of the strongest exhaustion perks in the entire game. And in the shifting meta where survivors were looking for control and second chances, Dead Hard delivered. And it was safe to say, not everyone was happy with this shift. As Dead Hard swept into the meta, it didn't take long for the complaints to follow. On community forums and social media, frustration began to mount, particularly among killer players. Some argued that the perk created an imbalance, granting survivors what felt like an undeserved second chance. One user described it as a third health state, while another claimed Dead Hard doesn't reward skill, it punishes timing. At the center of the debate was how difficult it was to counter. Killers could attempt to bait the dash, but doing so often resulted in loss of pressure and extended chases. While the perk required precise timing to use effectively, its mere presence forced killers to hesitate, sometimes even fatally. Swinging too early meant missing. Waiting too long often had the same result. Meanwhile, survivors defended the perk as a necessary tool against increasingly skilled killers. Some saw it as a reward for game sense and patience rather than a source of imbalance. But regardless of which side one stood on, few could deny its growing influence. It had become a fixture in nearly every single survivor build. Even those who once ignored it began to view it as essential. Killers in turn were adapting their strategies, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. With tensions rising and feedback growing louder, the community turned its attention towards the developers. Knowing the game had changed, the pressure was mounting on Behavior to do something about it. Countless complaints, forum posts, and video essays later, a true rework finally arrived. Patch 6.1.0, issued in July 2022, exactly 5 years after its initial release, marked Dead Hard's most dramatic change. The perk no longer gave a dash, but now granted endurance. A brief window of invincibility triggered only when a survivor used it at the exact moment of an incoming hit. On paper, this was a massive nerf. Behavior framed it as a way to make the perk more skill-based and situational. But the reality wasn't so simple, because players quickly adapted. Dead Hard was no longer a movement tool, but a hit negation button. Now, instead of dashing through a pallet or a window, survivors simply tank hits outright. For killers, this was arguably worse. Predicting a dash was one thing, but predicting a latency-dependent endurance timing was another, and complaints resumed almost immediately. What was meant to be a nerf had simply changed the problem, not solved it. Behavior would go on to adjust its cooldown, rework the animation timing, and even tweak hit validation rules to better align the server logic. But the core issue remained untouched. The perk still flipped the power dynamic in every single chase. In many ways, Dead Hard had become too big to fail. Every attempt to tone it down only backed up its status as a top-tier perk, and for every patch meant to balance it, another wave of unintended consequences followed. And so, almost a year later, Behavior finally decided to put the final nail in the coffin. As of patch 7.0.0, the perk can only be used twice per match, only after the survivor is unhooked. meaning no more constant clutch saves and guessing games in every single chase. For the first time in years, Dead Hard was no longer a default pick, but a choice. Some survivors still run it out of habit, nostalgia, or just because it fits their playstyle. Others have moved on, exploring newer perks that offer more utility and reliability. And on the killer side, complaints have largely fallen silent. The frustration and the endless debates have grown quieter. And even though Dead Hard still exists, and it still has value, it no longer defines the game. In a way, its legacy is less about the perk itself and more about the ripple effect it left behind. The metas it shaped, the mind games it created, and the countless headaches it caused were all because of just one single button. But for a time, that button changed everything.